What happens when the most feared ruler in the galaxy, a being whose very name makes entire star systems surrender without a fight, walks into a small coffee shop on a backwater planet called Earth? What happens when the only person who doesn't bow, doesn't flee, doesn't even recognize him, is a tired human barista who just wants to make decent coffee and pay rent? Sometimes the most powerful beings in the universe discover that what they've been searching for across countless worlds was hiding in plain sight, in the most unexpected place, served by the most unlikely hands. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find what truly matters. And, sometimes, the fate of an entire galaxy can change over a simple cup of coffee. This is the story of Emperor ZYX Theron, the Crimson Death, the dragon who burns stars, and how a human named Maya taught him what it really means to live. The rain fell like tears from a broken sky, each droplet catching the neon glow of the city lights as ZYX Theron walked through the empty streets of downtown Portland. His massive frame, even in this diminished humanoid form, cast long shadows that seemed to writhe and dance in the flickering light. To any human observer, he appeared as a tall, pale man with strikingly angular features and eyes that held depths no earthly creature should possess. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lay something far more ancient and terrible than any human mind could comprehend. For 3,000 years, ZYX Theron had ruled the Crimson Dominion, an empire that spanned 14 galaxies and commanded the absolute loyalty of over 10 trillion sentient beings. His true form, a magnificent dragon of crystalline scales and starfire breath, had reduced entire worlds to ash when their rulers dared to defy him. The mere mention of his name had ended wars before they could begin, as enemy fleets surrendered rather than face the Dragon Emperor's wrath. But, now, walking these alien streets under this alien sky, he felt nothing but a hollow emptiness that had been growing within him for decades. Victory had lost its taste. Conquest had become meaningless. Even the elaborate ceremonies where lesser beings prostrated themselves before his throne brought him no satisfaction. He had everything any creature could desire, commanded power beyond imagination, yet something essential was missing from his existence. The rain intensified as he wandered aimlessly through the human settlement. Earth was supposed to be his final stop before returning to the capital world of Drakmor. His scouts had reported that this backwater planet harbored a species called humans, apparently unremarkable creatures who had barely achieved basic space travel. They posed no threat to his empire, possessed no resources worth claiming, and would likely destroy themselves within a few centuries anyway. It was meant to be a simple reconnaissance mission, a way to catalog another insignificant species before moving on. Yet something about this world had compelled him to personally investigate. Perhaps it was the reports of their strange behavior patterns, their apparent tendency to show kindness to strangers and form bonds with creatures they had never met. Such concepts were alien to most civilized species, who operated on strict hierarchies based on power and utility. The humans seemed to defy these natural laws, and ZYX Theron found himself curious about these peculiar beings. As he turned a corner, the warm glow of a small establishment caught his attention. Through rain-streaked windows, he could see a cozy interior with mismatched furniture and walls covered in what appeared to be artistic expressions created by the local inhabitants. A sign above the door read Maya's Corner Cafe in cheerful yellow letters that seemed to glow with an inviting warmth. ZYX Theron paused, studying the humble building. In all his millennia of existence, he had never simply entered an establishment as a regular patron. When the Dragon Emperor wanted something, it was brought to him on golden platters by trembling servants. When he traveled, entire cities prepared for weeks to receive him appropriately. The very idea of walking into some common establishment and simply purchasing something was so foreign to his experience that it intrigued him. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside, immediately enveloped by warmth and the rich aroma of roasted beans. The interior was exactly as humble as it had appeared from outside: worn wooden tables, mismatched chairs that had seen better decades, and shelves lined with books that customers had apparently left behind. Soft jazz music played from hidden speakers, creating an atmosphere of comfortable tranquility that was utterly unlike anywhere he had ever been. Behind the counter stood a young human female, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and her clothes bearing the stains of honest work. She looked up as he entered, and, for a moment, ZYX Theron experienced something he had not felt in centuries: genuine surprise. Instead of the immediate terror that usually filled the eyes of those who beheld him, instead of the desperate scramble to prostrate themselves appropriately, this human simply smiled. "Hey there," she said cheerfully, wiping her hands on a towel. rough night to be out in the rain. What can I get you? ZYX Theron stood frozen for several seconds, his ancient mind struggling to process this unprecedented interaction. No being had spoken to him so casually since he was a wormling learning to fly among the crystal caves of his homeworld. No one had ever asked him what he wanted, as if he were simply another customer rather than the supreme ruler of known space. He began, then stopped. In his true form, his voice could shatter mountains and his roar could be heard across star systems. But, here, in this borrowed shape, his words came out as barely more than a whisper. I am not certain. The human, Maya, according to her name tag, tilted her head with the kind of patient expression he had seen her species use when dealing with confused children. First time in a coffee shop, she asked without any trace of mockery. No worries. What kind of things do you usually like? Sweet? Bitter? Strong? Mild? These were questions no one had ever asked him before. When the imperial chefs prepared his meals, they simply provided whatever they believed would please him most. When servants brought him wine, it was always the finest vintage from conquered worlds, regardless of his actual preferences. The concept of personal choice in something as simple as a beverage was utterly foreign to his experience. I do not know, he admitted, the words feeling strange on his tongue. In my previous experiences, such choices were made for me. Something in his tone must have suggested a deeper meaning, because Maya's expression softened with what he would later learn to recognize as empathy. Controlling family, she asked gently. Boss who micromanages everything? I get it. Sometimes it's nice to make your own choices, even small ones. ZYX Theron nodded slowly, though her interpretation was so far from the truth it was almost amusing. He found himself oddly reluctant to correct her misunderstanding. There was something pleasant about being seen as simply another being with problems rather than the emperor of everything. Tell you what, Maya continued, moving toward the elaborate machine behind the counter. I'm going to make you my personal favorite. It's nothing fancy, just a simple coffee with a touch of honey and cinnamon. Warm, comforting, and not too intense for someone who's new to this. As she worked, ZYX Theron studied her movements with the analytical mind that had conquered galaxies. Her actions were efficient but unhurried, practiced but not mechanical. She hummed softly to herself as she prepared his drink, occasionally pausing to taste her work and make small adjustments. There was an artistry to her process that reminded him of the master craftsman who forged the ceremonial weapons in his palace, yet there was also something more personal, more intimate about it. So, she said as the machine hissed and gurgled, what brings you out in weather like this? You don't look like you're from around here. ZYX Theron considered his response carefully. In truth, he was not from around anywhere on this planet, or even this solar system. He was from a realm so distant that light from her star would take longer to reach his homeworld than this entire species had existed. But something about her casual curiosity made him want to engage in this strange ritual of small talk. I am traveling, he said simply. Exploring new places. Learning about different cultures. That's awesome, Maya replied, and her enthusiasm seemed genuine. I've always wanted to travel more. See new places, meet new people, you know? But the cafe keeps me pretty busy, and money's always tight. She laughed self-consciously. Sorry, you probably don't need to hear about my financial troubles. But ZYX Theron found himself oddly interested in these mundane concerns. In his empire, resources were allocated by imperial decree. If someone needed something, they petitioned the appropriate bureaucrats and waited for approval. The idea that this human had to carefully manage her resources, had to make difficult choices about how to spend her limited means, introduced him to concepts he had never considered. How do you manage? He asked, genuine curiosity coloring his voice. Maya looked up from the coffee machine, surprise flickering across her features. Most people don't ask about stuff like that, she said. But, I guess, you just do, you know? You work hard, you save what you can, you appreciate the small things. Like tonight, sure, business has been slow because of the weather, but that just means I get to have actual conversations with customers instead of rushing around like crazy. She finished preparing his drink and slid it across the counter in a simple white ceramic mug. Steam rose from the dark liquid, carrying with it an aroma that was warm and inviting in a way that was entirely different from the elaborate delicacies he was accustomed to. "That's $4.50, she said. ZYX Theron stared at the mug for a moment, then reached into the pocket of his borrowed clothes. His subordinates had provided him with local currency for exactly this purpose, though he had never imagined actually using it. The transaction was simple, straightforward, and yet it felt monumentous in its very ordinariness. He took his first sip and was immediately surprised by the complexity of flavors. It was nothing like the bitter stimulants his species typically consumed, nor the elaborate ceremonial drinks served at imperial banquets. This was something entirely different, warm, comforting, with layers of taste that revealed themselves gradually. The honey provided sweetness without overwhelming the natural flavors of the beans, while the cinnamon added a warmth that seemed to spread through his entire borrowed form. "Good?" Maya asked, watching his expression with the kind of attention a master craftsman might pay to someone experiencing their work for the first time. "It is." He paused, searching for the right words in this strange human language. "It is perfect." Maya beamed with obvious pleasure at his response. "I'm glad you like it. Coffee's kind of my thing, you know? I mean, I'm not changing the world or anything, but I like to think I'm making people's days a little bit better, one cup at a time." As ZYX Theron sipped his coffee, he studied this remarkable human more carefully. She was completely unremarkable by the standards he was accustomed to: no enhanced physical capabilities, no psychic powers, no advanced technology integrated into her biology. By every metric his civilization used to measure worth, she was insignificant. Yet there was something about her presence, her contentment with this simple life, her genuine pleasure in providing comfort to strangers, that fascinated him in a way he could not explain. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly. "Make coffee?" Maya shrugged. "I'm good at it, and I like making people happy. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. Besides, you meet interesting people." She smiled at him. Like mysterious travelers who've never been to a coffee shop before. ZYX Theron found himself returning her smile, an expression that felt foreign on his borrowed features. When had he last genuinely smiled? When had he last felt the simple pleasure of an unexpected encounter? For centuries, every interaction had been scripted, every meeting planned and orchestrated according to rigid protocols. But this was something entirely different. The bell chimed again as another customer entered, bringing a gust of cold air and rain. Maya's attention shifted to the newcomer, and ZYX Theron found himself oddly reluctant to share her focus. He moved to one of the small tables near the window, settling into a chair that creaked softly under his weight, and continued to observe. The new customer was an elderly human male, his clothes worn but clean, his manner suggesting someone for whom every expenditure required careful consideration. Maya's entire demeanor brightened when she saw him. "Evening, Mr. Patterson," she called out warmly. "The usual?" "Just a small coffee tonight," the old man replied apologetically. "Things are a bit tight until my social security check comes in." ZYX Theron watched as Maya nodded understandingly, then prepared what appeared to be a much larger coffee than requested. She also added what looked like a pastry to a small bag. "You know what," she said casually, "I made too much of the apple turnovers today. Would you mind taking one off my hands? I hate to see them go to waste." The old man's eyes brightened with gratitude that he tried to hide behind gruff dignity. "Well, if it's just going to go to waste." This interaction puzzled ZYX Theron tremendously. Maya was clearly providing more value than she was receiving in return, and doing so in a way that preserved the old man's dignity. In his empire, such inefficiency would be corrected immediately. Resources were allocated based on strict calculations of utility and need. But this human seemed to operate on entirely different principles. As the evening progressed, more customers trickled in seeking refuge from the storm. ZYX Theron observed each interaction with growing fascination. A young woman studying for examinations received an extra shot of espresso and encouragement. A couple on an obvious first date were suddenly given a table with better lighting and privacy. A tired worker coming off a late shift was served coffee that was clearly stronger than standard, along with kind words about the difficulty of night work. In each case, Maya seemed to instinctively understand what each person needed beyond their simple order. She provided not just beverages, but moments of human connection, small kindnesses that cost her little but clearly meant a great deal to her customers. It was a form of leadership entirely unlike anything in his experience. When the Dragon Emperor commanded, beings obeyed because they feared the consequences of refusal. When he provided benefits, it was calculated to maintain loyalty and ensure continued service. But this human led through service itself, creating loyalty not through fear or obligation, but through genuine care for others' well-being. As the last customer of the evening departed, Maya began her closing routine. She moved efficiently through her tasks, cleaning equipment and organizing supplies for the next day. ZYX Theron remained at his table, nursing the remains of his coffee and struggling to understand the profound shift occurring in his perception of existence. "You're welcome to stay until I'm done," Maya called over to him. "Though I should warn you, I'm probably going to start talking to myself. Occupational hazard of working alone most of the time." "I do not mind," he replied honestly. In fact, he found himself desperate to extend this experience, to remain in this small bubble of warmth and normalcy for as long as possible. As Maya worked, she did indeed begin talking, not to herself, but to him, sharing stories about her customers, her dreams of expanding the cafe, her challenges with suppliers and equipment. She spoke unselfconsciously, treating him like a friend rather than a stranger, and ZYX Theron found himself hanging on every word. "You know what's funny," she said as she wiped down the counter. "Most people think running a small business like this is limiting. Like I'm stuck here, not doing anything important with my life. But I see it completely differently. Every day, I get to be part of dozens of people's stories. I'm there for their first dates, their late-night study sessions, their morning routines before big meetings. I'm this tiny constant in all these lives, and that feels pretty meaningful to me." ZYX Theron considered this perspective. He had commanded the destinies of trillions, had shaped the course of galactic history, had left his mark on the cosmos itself. Yet this human, who affected perhaps a few dozen lives each day in the smallest possible ways, seemed to find more genuine fulfillment than he had experienced in millennia. "Do you ever feel lonely?" he asked quietly. Maya paused in her cleaning, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But loneliness and being alone aren't the same thing, you know? I can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely if I'm not really connecting with them. But here, even though I'm technically by myself most of the time, I feel connected to something bigger. To the community, to the people who trust me with their small daily rituals." Her words struck him like a physical blow. Surrounded by countless servants and subordinates, attended by armies and advisors, celebrated by entire worlds, he had never felt more alone than he did in this moment. All those beings around him were there because they had to be, because defying the Dragon Emperor meant death or worse. But this human had chosen to be kind to him, a stranger, simply because kindness was part of who she was. "I should go," he said suddenly, standing with such abrupt force that the chair scraped loudly against the floor. Maya looked up, concern immediately clouding her features. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," he said quickly. "You have said nothing wrong. You have been perfect. But I must leave." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. She stood behind her counter in her stained apron, surrounded by the simple tools of her trade, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Not because of her physical appearance, but because of the light that seemed to shine from within her, the genuine goodness that informed every action, every word. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying more weight than she could possibly understand. "For the coffee. And for what? For treating me like a person." Before she could respond, he pushed through the door and back into the storm. The rain hit him like a slap of reality, reminding him of what he truly was. He was ZYX Theron, the Crimson Death, Emperor of 14 galaxies. He commanded fleets that could crack planets and armies that could extinguish stars. He was not some lonely traveler seeking comfort in a humble cafe. But, as he walked through the empty streets, Maya's words echoed in his mind. Every day, she got to be part of dozens of people's stories. She was a tiny constant in all these lives, and that felt meaningful to her. What stories was he part of? What constants did he provide besides fear and submission? For the first time in 3 millennia, ZYX Theron began to question everything he thought he knew about power, about leadership, and about what it truly meant to matter in the vast cosmos. And, somewhere in the depths of his ancient heart, a seed of something new began to take root, something that might, given time and proper care, grow into something that could transform not just him, but entire galaxies. The Dragon Emperor walked through the rain, and, for the first time in forever, he felt truly alive. ZYX Theron materialized aboard his flagship, the World Render, in a cascade of crimson energy that caused the bridge crew to immediately prostrate themselves. The massive dreadnought, larger than most human cities, hung in the shadow of Earth's moon like a dark omen against the stars. Its bioorganic hull pulsed with veins of molten metal, and weapon arrays capable of reducing continents to ash tracked silently across space as automated systems maintained their eternal vigil. My Emperor, Admiral Kethvar, spoke from his position face down on the deck, his forearms spread wide in the traditional gesture of absolute submission. "We await your orders regarding the human world." ZYX Theron stood silent for long moments, still processing the evening's revelations. Around him, his command staff remained frozen in their submissive poses, none daring to move until he gave them permission. The bridge was a monument to imperial power, soaring crystalline pillars embedded with the preserved skulls of defeated enemies, holographic displays showing the real-time status of his vast empire, and, at the center of it all, the Dragon Throne, carved from a single massive ruby and inscribed with the names of every world he had conquered. "Rise," he commanded finally, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The crew scrambled to their feet with military precision, but kept their gazes respectfully lowered. ZYX Theron moved to the primary viewing portal, gazing down at the blue-white marble that was Earth. From this distance, it appeared peaceful, beautiful even. No orbital defense platforms, no weapon satellites, no signs of the military might that usually greeted his arrival at enemy worlds. The humans had no idea that their entire civilization could be erased with a single word from him. "Status report," he said. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward, his scarred carapace bearing the decorations of 100 conquered systems. "Deep scans confirmed the initial assessment, my Emperor. The humans possess primitive technology, barely achieving basic nuclear capabilities. Their population is fractured into numerous competing nation-states, with no unified planetary government. Military forces are planetary-bound and would pose no significant threat to even our smallest escort vessels." Commander Zalathis, his chief intelligence officer, added her own assessment. "Cultural analysis indicates they are a highly emotional species, prone to irrational decisions based on concepts they term morality and ethics. They frequently act against their own self-interest to help others, even strangers. This psychological weakness could be exploited for easy conquest, though it makes them unpredictable in some situations." ZYX Theron listened to the reports with growing discomfort. Everything they described was accurate from a military and strategic perspective, yet it completely failed to capture what he had experienced in that small cafe. The weakness they identified, this tendency to help strangers without personal gain, was exactly what had affected him so profoundly. "Recommendations?" he asked. "Standard subjugation protocol, my Emperor," Admiral Kethvar responded immediately. "Establish orbital supremacy, eliminate key military installations, demand submission from their leadership. Estimated timeline for complete conquest, 14 standard hours. Estimated casualties, minimal to our forces, approximately 200 million humans in the pacification phase." 200 million. The number hit ZYX Theron like a physical blow. To his military staff, it was simply an acceptable casualty estimate, the cost of bringing another world under imperial control. But now he could not help but imagine Maya among those numbers. Maya with her kind smile and her genuine concern for strangers. Maya who found meaning in small acts of kindness, who created warmth and community in a simple cafe. "My Emperor?" Admiral Kethvar ventured, clearly puzzled by his silence. "Shall I begin deployment of the subjugation fleets?" "No." The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the bridge, his staff exchanged glances of confusion and concern. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Dragon Emperor had never hesitated, never shown uncertainty about claiming a new world for the Empire. "My Emperor," Commander Zalathis spoke carefully, "perhaps you require additional intelligence?" We could deploy stealth reconnaissance units to gather more detailed cultural and military data. ZYX Theron turned from the viewing portal, and his staff took an involuntary step back at the expression on his face. It was not anger they saw there, which they could have understood and responded to appropriately. Instead, they saw something far more disturbing: uncertainty, confusion, and something that might have been pain. "Tell me, Admiral," ZYX Theron said slowly, "in all our conquests, have we ever encountered a species that acted primarily from kindness rather than self-interest?" The question clearly baffled the veteran commander. "Kindness, my Emperor? That is to say, most species exhibit some form of pack bonding or tribal loyalty, but I am not certain what you mean by kindness as a primary motivator." "What about generosity? The willingness to give something of value to strangers with no expectation of return? That would be extremely inefficient, my Emperor. Most species we encounter operate on principles of resource optimization and hierarchical dominance. Generosity toward outsiders would be selected against by evolutionary pressures." ZYX Theron nodded slowly, understanding that his staff could not comprehend what he had experienced any more than he had been able to comprehend it initially. They were products of a civilization built on conquest and domination, where strength was the only virtue that mattered and weakness was ruthlessly eliminated. The concepts that governed Maya's simple cafe were as alien to them as their advanced technology would be to her. "Schedule another reconnaissance mission," he ordered finally. "Personal observation. I will return to the planet's surface." "My Emperor," Chief Science Officer Velkys interjected, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy, "if you require more detailed cultural samples, we could simply acquire several thousand human specimens for analysis. Their cognitive patterns could be mapped in detail within a few days." The casual way his subordinate suggested kidnapping thousands of sentient beings for experimentation made ZYX Theron's stomach turn. How many times had he approved similar operations without a second thought? How many civilizations had been reduced to laboratory subjects in his name? "That will not be necessary," he said, his voice carrying a warning that made the science officer retreat into respectful silence. As his staff dispersed to carry out their duties, ZYX Theron remained at the viewing portal, studying the world below. Somewhere down there, Maya was probably getting ready for bed after a long day of work. She would rise tomorrow morning, open her cafe, and spend another day providing small kindnesses to anyone who walked through her door. She would do this not because anyone commanded her to, not because she feared punishment if she failed, but simply because she believed it was the right thing to do. The concept was so foreign to his understanding of motivation that he found himself questioning fundamental assumptions about how societies functioned. His empire was based on the principle that beings would only serve if compelled to do so through threat or reward. Yet Maya served others freely, finding fulfillment in the act itself. What would happen if that principle could be scaled up? What kind of civilization could be built on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced submission? The questions troubled him through the remainder of the ship's night cycle. He retired to his private chambers, a vast space that had been decorated with the treasures of 1,000 worlds. Priceless artifacts lined the walls, each one representing the fall of another civilization. His bed was carved from the heartwood of the last tree on Sylvanus Prime, and his bathroom featured running water diverted from the sacred springs of the ethereal monks of Zenthari. Everything in his personal space spoke to his power, his conquests, his absolute dominion over countless worlds. Yet as he lay there surrounded by the spoils of empire, all he could think about was a simple white ceramic mug and the taste of coffee flavored with honey and cinnamon. When he finally slept, his dreams were filled with images of fire and destruction. But now the faces in the flames were not anonymous enemies but individuals with hopes and dreams and small daily rituals that brought them joy. He saw Maya's cafe burning, saw her kind smile twisted with terror and pain, and he woke with a start that sent psychic tremors through the ship's hull. The next evening, he once again assumed human form and materialized on Earth's surface. This time, he had researched human customs more thoroughly, using the ship's vast databases to understand their social patterns and behavioral norms. He had even programmed the matter converters to create clothing that would help him blend in more effectively with the local population. Maya's cafe glowed warm and welcoming in the darkness, exactly as it had the night before. Through the windows, he could see her moving about inside, preparing for another evening of service. The sight filled him with an emotion he could not name, not desire exactly, though there was something of that in it, but something deeper and more complex. A longing not just for her presence, but for the world she represented, the life she lived, the values she embodied. He pushed through the door, and the bell chimed its cheerful greeting. Maya looked up from the book she was reading, and her face brightened with genuine pleasure when she saw him. "Hey, you came back," she said, closing the book and moving toward the counter. "How did you like the coffee? Good enough to brave another rainy night?" "It was exceptional," he replied, and was surprised to hear how much more natural his voice sounded. The stiffness that had marked his speech the previous evening was gone, replaced by something warmer and more conversational. "Great. Same thing again, or would you like to try something different?" The question presented him with another novel experience, the opportunity to make a choice based purely on personal preference. In his empire, variation was provided by servants who anticipated his desires and presented him with options they believed would please him. But this was different. This was Maya asking what he wanted, not what she thought he should want. "What would you recommend?" he asked. Maya's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who truly loved their craft. "Well, since you liked the cinnamon and honey combination, you might enjoy something a little more complex. I've been experimenting with a blend that uses cardamom and a touch of orange zest. It's warmer, more sophisticated, but still comforting." "That sounds perfect." As she prepared his drink, Maya chatted easily about her day, her customers, and her ongoing experiments with new flavor combinations. ZYX therein found himself drawn into the conversation in a way that felt completely natural, sharing observations about the city, asking questions about her work, engaging in the kind of casual interaction that formed the backbone of human social life. "So," Maya said as she handed him his coffee, "what kind of work do you do? You have this way of speaking that suggests you're used to being in charge of things." The question caught him off guard. How could he explain that his work involved commanding the largest empire in galactic history? That his decisions affected the lives of trillions? That he was personally responsible for the destruction of entire civilizations? "I manage a large organization," he said carefully. "Many people depend on the decisions I make." "That sounds stressful," Maya replied with immediate sympathy. "Must be hard to always have that kind of responsibility on your shoulders. How do you deal with it?" No one had ever asked him that question before. No one had ever inquired about the personal cost of wielding absolute power. His subordinates assumed he was above such mortal concerns, while his enemies simply hoped he would be destroyed by them. But Maya's question came from a place of genuine care, as if she understood that power came with a price and wanted to know how he coped with it. "I am not certain I do deal with it well," he admitted. "Lately, I have been questioning many of my decisions." "Sounds like you might need a vacation," Maya said with a grin. "When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Something fun, not related to work?" The question was so absurd that ZYX Theron almost laughed. Dragons did not take vacations. Emperors did not do things just for fun. His entire existence was devoted to the expansion and maintenance of his empire. Even his few recreational activities, hunting exotic creatures on distant worlds, attending gladiatorial contests featuring captured enemies, were expressions of his power rather than genuine enjoyment. "I cannot remember," he said honestly. Maya's expression grew concerned. "Oh, honey, that's not healthy. Everyone needs time to just be themselves, you know? To do things that make them happy without worrying about obligations or expectations." The endearment honey struck him as profoundly as any weapon ever had. It was casual, affectionate, the kind of thing humans said to friends and loved ones. No one had ever called him anything but titles: Your Imperial Majesty, Great Destroyer, Lord of all that burns. To be called honey by this remarkable human felt like being acknowledged as a person rather than a position. "What makes you happy?" he asked. "Oh, lots of things," Maya replied, settling into the conversation with obvious pleasure. "Good coffee, obviously. Books, I'm a total sci-fi nerd. I love stories about exploring other worlds and meeting alien species. Rainy nights like this when the cafe is quiet and I can actually talk to people. Seeing regular customers find happiness in small things. Creating something that brings people comfort. She paused, studying his face with those perceptive eyes. You know what I think you need? A friend. Someone you can just talk to without worrying about all that management stuff. Someone who likes you for who you are, not what you do. The suggestion was so revolutionary that ZYX Theron felt momentarily dizzy. Friendship was not a concept that existed in his world. There were allies and enemies, superiors and subordinates, useful beings and obstacles to be eliminated. But the idea of someone who valued his company without expecting anything in return, who would listen to his thoughts without judgment, who would offer support during difficult times, it was as appealing as it was impossible. I would like that, he said quietly. But my situation is complicated. Most interesting people's situations are, Maya replied with a knowing smile. Tell you what, why don't you consider this place a friend zone? When you're here, you're just, what should I call you? You never told me your name. The question presented him with a dilemma. His true name carried power across the galaxy. To speak it was to invoke forces that could reshape reality itself. But he needed something to be called, some identity that was separate from his imperial role. Call me ZYX, he said finally, using a shortened version of his true name. ZYX, Maya repeated, and somehow the way she said it made it sound like a completely different word. Not the name of a feared emperor, but simply the name of a person. I like it. It's unusual. Fits you. They talked for hours that night. Maya shared stories about her childhood, her dreams of travel, her philosophy about finding meaning in small acts of service. ZYX found himself opening up in ways he had never done before, sharing carefully edited versions of his experiences, his struggles with responsibility, his growing sense of isolation despite being surrounded by countless beings. When other customers arrived, he watched Maya work with growing appreciation for her skill. She remembered not just their orders, but details about their lives. She asked the college student about her exams, inquired about the construction worker's injured shoulder, and celebrated with the young couple who had gotten engaged since their last visit. Each interaction was brief but genuine, creating a web of human connection that extended far beyond simple commerce. How do you remember so much about everyone? He asked during a quiet moment. I care about them, Maya said simply. When you actually care about people, you pay attention. You remember what matters to them because it matters to you too. The concept was staggering in its implications. What if leadership was not about commanding obedience through fear, but about caring so deeply for those under your authority that their well-being became your primary concern? What if the true measure of power was not how much you could take, but how much you could give? As the evening wound down, ZYX found himself reluctant to leave. The warmth of the cafe, the easy companionship, the sense of being valued for himself rather than his position, it was addictive in a way that conquest had never been. Same time tomorrow? Maya asked as she began her closing routine. If you do not mind the company. Mind it? ZYX, you've been the highlight of my week. It's so nice to have someone to really talk to, you know? Most of my conversations are pretty surface level by necessity. But, with you, I feel like we could discuss anything. As he walked back through the rainy streets, ZYX carried her words with him like a precious treasure. For the first time in millennia, someone was looking forward to seeing him. Not because they needed something from him, not because they feared him, but because they genuinely enjoyed his company. Back aboard the World Render, his staff noticed the change in his demeanor immediately. His orders were calmer, more thoughtful. When Admiral Kethvar presented the latest reports on Imperial expansion, ZYX found himself asking questions he had never asked before. What happened to the civilian populations of conquered worlds? How were their cultural traditions preserved or integrated? Were there alternative methods of bringing systems into the Empire that did not require military subjugation? His subordinates were baffled by these inquiries, but they dutifully began researching answers. And, in the quiet of his chambers, ZYX Theron, Emperor of 14 Galaxies, found himself reading human literature downloaded from Earth's global information networks, trying to understand the species that had produced someone like Maya. The more he read, the more convinced he became that humanity represented something unprecedented in his experience, a species that had developed advanced concepts of ethics and morality not as abstractions, but as lived principles that guided daily behavior. They were not perfect by any means, but, at their best, they embodied ideals that his vast empire had never even considered. And, somewhere in the depths of space, seeds of revolution began to sprout in the heart of a dragon who was learning, for the first time, what it meant to be truly alive. 3 weeks had passed since ZYX Theron first walked into Maya's corner cafe, and what began as simple curiosity had evolved into something far more profound. Every evening, he materialized in the alley behind the cafe, assumed his human form, and spent hours in conversation with the woman who had unknowingly begun to reshape his understanding of existence itself. Tonight was different, though. As he approached the familiar warm glow of the cafe windows, he could see that something was wrong. Maya stood behind the counter with slumped shoulders, her usual bright demeanor replaced by obvious distress. Several official-looking documents were spread across the counter before her, and, even from outside, he could sense her emotional turmoil. The bell chimed as he entered, but Maya barely looked up from the papers. When she did, he could see that her eyes were red-rimmed with unshed tears. "Hey, ZYX," she said, attempting her usual cheerful greeting but failing to inject it with any real warmth. "I'll have your coffee ready in just a minute." "Maya," he said gently, moving to the counter. "What troubles you?" She laughed, but it was a bitter sound completely unlike her usual warmth. "Oh, just the usual small business nightmare. Nothing you need to worry about." But ZYX Theron had learned to read her expressions over the past weeks. He could see the way she held her shoulders when she was trying to be strong, the slight tremor in her voice when she was fighting back tears. In his empire, subordinates hid their problems from him because they feared showing weakness. Maya was hiding hers because she didn't want to burden a friend with her troubles. "Please," he said. "Tell me." Maya studied his face for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "My landlord is selling the building. The new owners want to demolish it and put up condos. I have 30 days to find a new location or..." She gestured helplessly at the cafe around them. "This all goes away. Surely you can find another suitable location?" Maya shook her head, gathering up the documents with hands that shook slightly. "Do you know what commercial rent costs in this city? I could maybe afford some tiny space in the suburbs, but that would mean starting over completely. New customer base, new foot traffic patterns, and that's assuming I can even get financing for the move and new equipment setup." As she spoke, ZYX Theron processed the information with the same analytical mind that had conquered galaxies. The problem was fundamentally simple: Maya needed more resources than she possessed. In his empire, such issues were resolved by imperial decree. Resources were allocated where they were needed, obstacles were removed, solutions were implemented with ruthless efficiency. But Earth did not operate according to imperial systems. Here, Maya was constrained by human economic structures that seemed designed to prevent exactly the kind of success she deserved. She was trapped not by lack of skill or effort, but by a system that prioritized wealth accumulation over community value. "How much would you need?" he asked quietly. Maya looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "To relocate. To establish yourself in a better location. How much would that require?" "Oh, ZYX, no," Maya said immediately, understanding his implication. I'm not telling you this because I want help. I would never ask you to. But, if you could ask. If pride were not a factor. How much?" Maya stared at him for a long moment, clearly wrestling with herself. Finally, she pulled a small notebook from under the counter and flipped through several pages covered in her neat handwriting. "I ran the numbers a dozen times," she said quietly. "Between first and last month's rent on a decent location, equipment moving and set up, marketing to build a new customer base, and having enough operating capital to survive the transition, probably around $200,000. Which might as well be $2 million for someone like me. $200,000. The amount was so trivial by imperial standards that ZYX Theron almost laughed. The ceremonial crown he wore during formal occasions was worth more than that. The fuel consumed by his flagship during a single day of travel cost more than Maya needed to save her entire livelihood. "And if you had that amount?" "If I had that amount, I could probably find a place in the Pearl District. Good foot traffic, established commercial area, The kind of location where a cafe could really thrive instead of just survive. Maya's voice grew wistful as she spoke. There's this perfect space I've been dreaming about for years. Ground floor of a historic building, huge windows, exposed brick walls, enough room to actually have seating for more than 12 people. She trailed off, then shook her head firmly. But dreaming doesn't pay bills. I need to focus on realistic options. ZYX Theron nodded thoughtfully, but his mind was already working through the logistics. Transferring imperial resources to human monetary systems would require careful handling, but it was entirely possible. His intelligence division maintained assets on thousands of worlds, including sophisticated economic manipulation capabilities for pre-contact civilizations. Make your coffee, he said. Tell me about this perfect location. As Maya prepared his drink, she described the space she had discovered during one of her rare afternoon walks through the more upscale parts of the city. Her voice gradually brightened as she spoke, the act of sharing her dream clearly providing some relief from her current stress. It's probably stupid to even think about it, she concluded, sliding his coffee across the counter. The rent alone would be 3 times what I'm paying here. But the customer base would be larger? More affluent? Oh, absolutely. The foot traffic alone, and the Pearl District has become this amazing community hub. Art galleries, bookstores, little boutique shops. The kind of place where a really good cafe could become a neighborhood institution instead of just another coffee shop. ZYX Theron sipped his coffee. Tonight she had tried something new, a blend with hints of vanilla and dark chocolate that somehow perfectly matched his mood, and considered the situation. Maya had identified a clear path to success, but lacked only the initial resources to pursue it. In his empire, such inefficiencies were corrected as a matter of course. But, more than that, he was beginning to understand that Maya's cafe was not just a business. It was a focal point for community, a place where human beings connected with each other across the barriers that normally divided them. The elderly man who couldn't quite afford his coffee but received kindness instead. The college students who found encouragement along with caffeine. The tired workers who discovered a moment of warmth in their difficult days. What Maya had created was, in its small way, exactly the kind of institution his empire lacked. A place where beings came together not because they were commanded to, but because they found value in the connection itself. If such places could exist on a larger scale, if they could become the model for how societies functioned. Maya, he said suddenly, would you trust me with something important? She looked up from wiping down the counter, her expression curious but open. Of course. What do you need? Give me the address of this perfect location. Let me investigate the situation. ZYX, I told you, I can't ask you to, you are not asking. I am offering. And I am not offering to solve your problems for you. I am offering to gather information that might help you solve them yourself. It was a careful distinction, one that preserved her dignity while giving him room to maneuver. Maya studied his face for a long moment, clearly trying to read his intentions. Why, she asked finally. Why would you do that for someone you've only known a few weeks? The question cut to the heart of everything he had been struggling with. Why indeed? Because she had shown him kindness when she had no reason to? Because she had treated him as a person rather than a position? Because in her small cafe, he had discovered what it felt like to matter for who he was rather than what he could take or destroy? Because, he said simply, you have given me something I did not know I needed. You have shown me that there are different ways to live, different ways to lead, different ways to find meaning. If I can help preserve that for others, should I not try? Maya's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. You're a good man, ZYX. I don't know what kind of organization you manage, but they're lucky to have someone who thinks like you do. If only she knew, he thought. His organization spanned galaxies and controlled the fates of trillions. But, in all his vast empire, there was no one who thought like he was learning to think. No one who valued kindness over conquest, community over control, growth over domination. As the evening progressed, other customers trickled in seeking refuge from the cold autumn night. ZYX Theron observed their interactions with Maya with new understanding. Each person who walked through that door was choosing to be part of something larger than themselves. They were choosing community over isolation, connection over convenience. And Maya was the catalyst that made it all possible. Her genuine care, her remembrance of small details, her willingness to give a little more than she received, these created the atmosphere that transformed a simple commercial transaction into a moment of human connection. When the last customer departed, Maya began her usual closing routine. But, tonight, ZYX Theron helped, learning the simple rhythms of cleaning equipment and organizing supplies. There was something meditative about the work, something satisfying about the physical act of caring for the tools and spaces that enabled service to others. You know, Maya said as they worked together, I've been thinking about what you said. About different ways to lead and find meaning. I may just run a little cafe, but I've seen what happens when people feel like they matter to someone. When they know there's at least one place in the world where they're valued just for being themselves. She paused in wiping down a table, looking around the small space with obvious affection. I used to think success meant expanding, franchising, turning this into some kind of business empire. But, watching you these past weeks, seeing how much you seem to need this place. I think maybe the real success is in creating something that makes people's lives a little bit better. Even if it's small. Even if it only touches a few dozen people. Her words struck him with the force of revelation. She had identified the exact principle he was struggling to understand, that true leadership was not about expanding your control over others, but about creating conditions where others could flourish. Not about taking more territory, but about nurturing what you already had. What if, he said carefully, what if it did not have to remain small? What if you could create something that touched hundreds of people, or thousands, while maintaining the same values? Maya looked at him sharply. What do you mean? The perfect location you described. What if it were possible? What if you could expand not for the sake of expansion, but to bring this feeling, this sense of community, to more people who need it? That's a beautiful dream, Maya said wistfully. But dreams don't change reality. Sometimes they do, ZYX Theron replied. Sometimes dreams are the first step toward changing everything. That night, aboard the World Render, he called a meeting of his senior staff. Admiral Kethvar, Commander Zalathis, and Chief Science Officer Velkays assembled in the war room, expecting to receive orders for Earth's subjugation. Instead, they found their emperor studying human economic data with the same intensity he usually reserved for battle plans. My emperor, Admiral Kethvar ventured, have you determined our approach to the human world? Yes, ZYX Theron replied without looking up from the displays. But, not in the way you expect. I need you to establish covert assets within their economic systems. Nothing dramatic. Shell corporations, investment funds, the kind of financial instruments their civilization uses for resource allocation. His staff exchanged puzzled glances. My emperor, Commander Zalathis said carefully, are we implementing an economic subjugation strategy? Controlling their resources through market manipulation? No. We are implementing an experiment in alternative leadership paradigms. I want to test whether it is possible to create positive change through support rather than conquest, through empowerment rather than domination. Chief Science Officer Velkays' tentacles writhed with confusion. I do not understand, my emperor. What is the strategic objective? ZYX Theron finally looked up from the displays, and his staff saw something in his expression that they had never seen before, not uncertainty, but a kind of focused intensity that was different from his usual commanding presence. The objective is to determine whether there is a better way to build an empire. A way that creates loyalty through gratitude rather than fear, growth through cooperation rather than force. The humans have concepts we have never seriously considered. I want to understand whether those concepts can be scaled up. And if the experiment fails? Admiral Kethvar asked. Then, we will have lost nothing but time and resources that are meaningless to us anyway. But, if it succeeds? ZYX Theron paused, considering the implications. If it succeeds, we may discover that everything we think we know about power and leadership is wrong. As his staff dispersed to implement his orders, ZYX Theron returned to studying human society with new eyes. He read their literature, analyzed their social structures, examined their concepts of justice and fairness and community responsibility.
And, slowly, a revolutionary idea began to take shape in his ancient mind.
What if the Dragon Emperor could learn to be something more than a destroyer?
What if the Crimson Dominion could become not just a collection of conquered worlds, but a genuine community of cooperation and mutual support?
It would require abandoning everything he thought he knew about leadership.
It would mean transforming not just himself, but the entire structure of his empire. It would be the greatest challenge he had ever faced, more difficult than any military campaign, more complex than any political maneuvering. But, if Maya's small cafe could create such profound change in the lives of a few dozen people, what might be possible if those same principles were applied on a galactic scale? For the first time in 3 millennia, ZYX Theron, Emperor of 14 galaxies, found himself planning not for conquest, but for transformation. And it all began with a simple act of friendship, helping one remarkable human save her cafe.
The revolution would start with a cup of coffee.
Maya stared at the official-looking documents spread across her kitchen table, reading them for the 4th time in disbelief. The letterhead was from Meridian Holdings LLC, a company she had never heard of, but the content was clear enough. They had purchased her building from the previous owners and were offering to sell her the perfect cafe location in the Pearl District at a price she could actually afford. More than that, they were offering favorable financing terms, a grace period for the transition, and even covering the costs of moving her existing equipment. It was everything she had dreamed of, packaged in legal language and delivered by a courier who had simply appeared at her door 3 days after her conversation with ZYX.
The coincidence was too perfect to be coincidental.
She looked up from the papers as the bell above her cafe door chimed. ZYX entered, shaking raindrops from his coat, and she felt a complex mix of emotions surge through her. Gratitude, certainly, but also confusion and a growing sense that there was much more to her mysterious friend than he had revealed.
"Good evening, Maya," he said, approaching the counter with his usual quiet intensity.
"Evening," she replied, but her tone was different tonight.
More cautious. "Coffee? Please."
He settled into his usual seat by the window, but she could feel him watching her as she prepared his drink. Tonight she made it exactly as she had the first evening they met, simple coffee with honey and cinnamon. Somehow it felt appropriate to return to where they had started. She brought the mug to his table and sat down across from him, the legal documents clutched in her hand.
"ZYX," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me."
His expression didn't change, but she had learned to read the subtle shifts in his body language. The slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hands stilled completely around the coffee mug. He was preparing for something he had been expecting.
"Of course," he said.
Maya placed the documents on the table between them.
"Do you know anything about Meridian Holdings LLC?" For a long moment, he didn't respond.
He stared down at the papers, and Maya saw something flicker across his face, not guilt exactly, but a kind of resigned acknowledgement.
"Yes," he said finally. "Are you behind this?"
"Yes." The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. Not because she was angry, though part of her was, but because it confirmed what she had been afraid to believe. Her mysterious friend, who had appeared out of nowhere and seemed to understand her so completely, was clearly far more than he had claimed to be.
"Who are you?" she asked quietly.
"Really?"
ZYX Theron looked up from the documents and met her eyes directly.
For weeks, he had been practicing being human, learning to express himself in ways this form could manage. But now, faced with her direct question and knowing that their relationship had reached a crucial turning point, he found himself struggling with how much truth to reveal. "Someone who has more resources than he knows what to do with," he said carefully.
"Someone who discovered that your friendship means more to him than all those resources combined.
Someone who would rather see you succeed than watch you fail because of circumstances beyond your control."
"That's not an answer, ZYX.
That's a deflection."
She was right, and he knew it.
Maya had always been direct with him, sharing her hopes and fears and dreams without reservation. She deserved the same honesty in return, even if the truth was impossible for her to fully comprehend. "I am someone whose entire life has been built around taking things from others," he said slowly.
"For the first time, I wanted to give something instead. To see what that felt like."
Maya studied his face intently. She had always sensed there was something different about him, something that set him apart from anyone else she had ever met. The way he spoke, as if he was carefully translating thoughts from another language. The way he observed human interactions with the fascination of someone seeing them for the first time. The absolute certainty in his voice when he talked about resources and power. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" she asked. "Is this money legal?" "The money is legally acquired," he assured her, which was technically true. His empire's economic operations followed whatever laws existed on the worlds where they operated. "And I am not in trouble, exactly. But my situation is complicated." Maya leaned back in her chair, processing this information. "So you're what, some kind of billionaire CEO who's having a midlife crisis? Who decided to play guardian angel to a struggling cafe owner?" "Something like that," he said, grateful for the interpretation that was both completely wrong and surprisingly close to the truth. "And you thought it was okay to just manipulate my life without telling me?" The accusation stung because it was accurate. He had used his vast resources to solve her problems without her knowledge or consent. In his empire, such actions were simply pragmatic leadership, identifying problems and implementing solutions. But Maya operated according to different values that emphasized choice and dignity and the right to determine one's own fate. "No," he said quietly. "It was not okay. I acted according to principles I am used to, but those principles do not account for what you have taught me about respect and consent." "I am sorry." The apology seemed to surprise her. Maya sat quietly for several minutes, reading through the documents again while he waited for her judgment. "The thing is," she said eventually, "this is exactly what I need. The location, the terms, the timing, it's perfect. Too perfect. Which means either you've been planning this for weeks, or I have access to resources and information that most people do not," he finished. "Right." She looked up at him sharply. "Just how wealthy are you, ZYX?" How could he answer that? His personal wealth, if calculated in human terms, would exceed the gross domestic product of most countries on Earth. The Crimson Dominion controlled resources from 14 galaxies. He could buy and sell entire solar systems if he chose to. "Wealthy enough that the cost of helping you achieve your dreams is meaningless to me," he said finally. "But not so wealthy that I do not understand the value of what you have built here." Maya absorbed this, then surprised him by laughing. "You know what the really crazy part is? I believe you. Not just about the money, but about why you did it. These past weeks, watching you discover what it's like to be part of a community, it's been like watching someone learn to breathe." Her perception was so accurate it took his breath away. That was exactly what it had been like, learning to breathe after millennia of suffocation he hadn't even realized he was experiencing. "So what now?" she asked. "Do I take your charity and pretend this is all normal? Do I walk away because I can't accept help I didn't ask for? Do I demand to know all your secrets? What do you want to do?" Maya looked around the small cafe, taking in the familiar space that had been her entire world for the past 5 years. Then, she looked back at the documents that represented everything she had dreamed of but never dared hope for. "I want to succeed," she said finally. "I want to create something bigger and better and more meaningful than this. But I want to do it honestly, with full knowledge of what I'm accepting and why." "Then, ask me what you need to know. Are you doing this because you feel sorry for me?" "No. I am doing this because you showed me a different way to live. Because you treated me like a person worth knowing when you had no reason to do so. Because in your cafe, I discovered what it feels like to matter for who I am rather than what I can provide or threaten." "Are you expecting anything in return? Any kind of personal relationship beyond friendship?" The question made him realize how carefully she had been thinking about this situation, considering all the possible motivations behind his actions. It also made him confront feelings he had been avoiding examining too closely. "I would be lying if I said my feelings for you were purely platonic," he said carefully. "But I am not offering this help as a way to create obligations or expectations. Whatever relationship we have, friendship, something more, or nothing at all, should be based on your free choice, not on what I have done for you." Maya nodded slowly. "Good answer.
Last question, are you going to disappear once this is done? Is this your way of setting up a grand gesture before you move on to whatever complicated life you have somewhere else? The question cut to the heart of his deepest fear. Because the truth was, he didn't know. Eventually, he would have to return to his empire, to deal with the responsibilities and challenges that came with ruling 14 galaxies. But the thought of leaving Maya, of giving up this glimpse of what life could be like, was almost unbearable. I do not want to disappear, he said honestly. But my life is complicated in ways that might make it difficult to maintain this. Difficult how? I travel extensively. I have responsibilities that require my attention across vast distances. There may be times when I cannot be here, when communication becomes challenging. Maya considered this, then smiled. You know, ZYX, for someone who claims to be straightforward, you're remarkably vague about the details of your life. Some details are difficult to explain. Try me. ZYX Theron looked into her eyes and saw the same fearless curiosity that had led her to treat a strange customer with kindness, the same openness that had allowed her to see past his carefully constructed facade to the loneliness beneath. Maya had proven again and again that she was capable of accepting the unexpected, of finding value in the unusual. But how could he tell her that he was not human? That he was a dragon whose true form was larger than her building, whose breath could melt steel, whose roar could shatter glass across continents? How could he explain that he ruled an empire spanning multiple galaxies, that his decisions affected trillions of beings, that he had personally destroyed civilizations that defied his will? If I told you that my responsibilities were not just extensive but literally cosmic in scope, he said slowly, if I told you that the organization I manage operates on a scale that most humans cannot even conceive of, would you believe me? Are you saying you're some kind of alien? Maya asked with a grin that suggested she thought he was making an elaborate joke. I am saying that the universe is much larger and more complex than most people realize, he replied carefully. And that I play a significant role in managing that complexity. Maya studied his expression, and slowly, her grin faded. You're serious? Yes. Are you actually human? The direct question hung in the air between them. ZYX Theron realized that they had reached the moment of ultimate truth, the point where he would either have to lie outright or reveal something that would change everything between them forever. No, he said quietly. I am not. For a long moment, Maya simply stared at him. He could see her mind working, processing this revelation against everything she thought she knew about him. He waited for the fear to set in, for the horror that usually accompanied being's realization of what he truly was. Instead, she leaned forward, her expression intent but not afraid. Okay, she said. So what are you? The simple acceptance in her voice, the matter-of-fact way she asked the question, nearly undid him completely. No one had ever reacted to the revelation of his true nature with calm curiosity rather than terror. Something very old, he said. Something that has spent too many years focused on conquest and domination. Something that is trying to learn a better way to exist. Are you dangerous? I could be. But not to you. Never to you. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Are there others like you? There are others of my species, but none quite like me. I am unique in my position. And this position involves managing organizations on a cosmic scale? Yes. So you're like, what, an alien emperor or something? The casual way she said it, as if being an alien emperor was only slightly more unusual than being a wealthy CEO, made him want to laugh despite the gravity of the situation. Something like that, he confirmed. Maya sat back in her chair, absorbing this information. Around them, the cafe felt suddenly small and fragile, a tiny island of normalcy in a universe that had just revealed itself to be far stranger and more vast than she had ever imagined. Well, she said finally, that explains a lot about your management style. And, incredibly, impossibly, she smiled. So, Alien Emperor, she continued, what happens now? Do I get to see your spaceship? Meet your alien friends? Learn the secrets of the universe? Would you want to? Are you kidding? ZYX, I told you I was a sci-fi nerd. This is literally the coolest thing that has ever happened to anyone in the history of ever.
Her enthusiasm was so genuine, so completely Maya, that ZYX Theron felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of what was possible. Here was a human who had just learned that her friend was an alien with cosmic responsibilities, and her reaction was excitement rather than fear. "There is much I could show you," he said carefully. "But such knowledge comes with consequences. Once you truly understand the scope of what exists beyond your world, it becomes difficult to return to simpler concerns."
"Maybe I don't want to return to simpler concerns," Maya replied. "Maybe I want to understand what's really out there.
Maybe I want to be part of something bigger than running a cafe in Portland.
Even if it means leaving Earth behind?"
The question surprised them both. He had not intended to ask it, had not consciously considered the possibility until the words left his mouth. But, now that it was spoken, he realized how desperately he wanted her answer to be yes.
Maya looked around the cafe one more time, then, back at him. "If I took your help, expanded to the Pearl District location, would that be permanent? Or would it be a stepping stone to something even bigger?" "It could be whatever you wanted it to be." "And if I wanted it to be a stepping stone to becoming part of your cosmic organization?" "Then, we would find a way to make that possible." Maya stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street.
When she turned back to face him, her expression was resolute. "I'll take the deal," she said.
"The cafe location, the financing, all of it. But not as charity, and not as a gift. As an investment.
In me, in my potential, in whatever I might become if I had the chance to grow beyond what I've been."
"And after the cafe is established?" "After the cafe is established, I want to learn everything. About you, about your empire, about what's really happening out there among the stars. And if there's a place for someone like me in that larger universe."
She paused, taking a deep breath.
"Well, I've always believed that the best way to find your place in the world is to start by making the world a little bit better wherever you are. Maybe it's time to find out how big my world really is." ZYX Theron stood and moved to join her at the window. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but, for the first time in millennia, he felt like he was watching the dawn of something new rather than the end of another conquered day. "Then, we begin with coffee," he said. "And we see where it leads us."
Maya smiled and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and small against his borrowed human flesh, but her grip was strong and sure.
"I can't wait," she said.
And, in the quiet cafe, with rain pattering against the windows and the aroma of coffee lingering in the air, an alien emperor and a human barista began planning a revolution that would reshape the galaxy one cup of kindness at a time. 6 months after Maya opened her new location in the Pearl District, the transformed cafe had become exactly what she had envisioned, a community hub where connection flourished over carefully crafted beverages. But, on this particular evening, as she locked the doors after another busy day, she knew her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined.
ZYX stood waiting in the alley behind the cafe, but tonight he was not alone.
Beside him stood a woman Maya had never seen before, tall, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient wisdom. There was something about her presence that made the air itself feel different, charged with an energy that made Maya's skin prickle.
"Maya," ZYX said as she approached, his voice carrying an unusual formality. "I would like